Wichita forever, but I actually came up to Kansas City covering a Chiefs game, and it was one of those moments where you're just doing your job. You're not thinking of anything else. And if you know these names, if you've been in Kansas City for a while, you'll know Brad Fanning and Nathan Vickers. And the two of them actually came up to me while I was doing my own live shot and doing a round table about the Chiefs game. And they said, hey, we might have this job opening coming up here in Kansas City. You should call the news director, maybe talk to him a little bit, and maybe this is something you want, maybe it's not, but just kind of feel it out. And so I said, okay, what's the harm in coming up here and just talking to people, right? So I came up and I fell in love with the city and with the people and with KCTV5 and knew that this was where I wanted to be, but I obviously had to talk to my husband about it. So we weren't quite sure we were going to come up here to Kansas City, and my husband and I went to bed on it, woke up, had been praying about it, and he said, I think we're being called to go to Kansas City. And I said, okay, let's do this. We had bought a house maybe 6 months prior, so we had to sell our house. We had to get all of that together, and we made our way up here to Kansas City. He ended up being able to move within his job as well, so that was a huge blessing. And it was one of the greatest things and greatest moves I think that we've ever made. And being up here, we're obviously still here. We obviously want to continue investing in this community. And so it has been such a beautiful, wild ride. I've gotten to do just about everything in the field of media, both in TV and from a radio perspective, which is the craziest part. My sister jokes with me. She says, I thought that you were going to be able to break barriers in television. I never thought you would do it in radio. And that's where I've done, that's where I think I've made some of my biggest marks and some of my biggest moves for women in the media industry is from the radio perspective.
That is, of course, as a sideline reporter for the Chiefs, and that is another step forward. And that's oftentimes you'll see that in television, that a woman on a network level or whatever will be a sideline reporter, but not necessarily in radio. How did that all come about?
That is a fun story as well. Look, my life is a full circle of just these God coincidences where things happen, and I tell people that the good Lord has been my agent because I've been very blessed by. Some people will say that it's the hard work creating the opportunities, but I give a lot of the credit to God above because He has opened a lot of doors for me and set me up for success. But this one, I came up on to KCTV5 and ended up meeting with Dan Israel, who is the executive producer of the Chiefs Radio Network. And we had a little bit of a conversation at a Starbucks talking about this job opportunity and kind of the direction that he wanted it to go. And, I brought up, being a former receiver, and he said, can you draw a route tree? And I said, yes. I grabbed a Starbucks napkin, and I drew a route tree on this Starbucks napkin for him. And I think he still has this napkin to this day. But he was like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. Well, look, this is going to be a really cool opportunity. Like, we think that you'll really like it. And I was like, oh, yeah, let's jump on board. Let's do this thing. And, of course, you have to go through and get your approvals from KCTV5 and, all of the powers that be. And so it was really cool that having my football background allowed that to happen. And then a few years later, I got the call to be the color analyst for the first ever full women's broadcast team for a college bowl game, and got to call the Cure Bowl with two other amazing women in Jamie Say and Melanie Newman. And Melanie is now actually doing both TV and radio for the Baltimore Orioles and setting and breaking boundaries there as well. So to be a part of that group was really, really cool. And to say that I am a pioneer is kind of surreal because we're in 2022 and it just doesn't feel like we should still be saying that. It feels like women have broken so many barriers and boundaries and created these paths that there shouldn't be many firsts left to do, right? And yet we're still seeing a lot of it being broken and barriers shattered and women being pioneers. And so for me to be a part of that very elite group, especially from the radio side of things, I consider to be a blessing, and I'm hoping that the good Lord is working through me and impacting other people for the better.
You obviously, things change, contracts change, networks change, everything else. That came to an end after a few years. How disappointing is that when you start to get your teeth into it and then you can't do it anymore?
From the radio standpoint?
Yeah.
It can be disappointing, but it's also a beautiful transition. I think that every time a door closes for me, another one opens, and I think that's the most positive way to look at it, is that when you speak things into existence and you set yourself up for success, then there will always be other opportunities. And I am a firm believer that even when certain doors close, other ones are wide open, and you just have to be willing to walk through those doors. And so not long after I ended my time with the Chiefs radio network, I found out that I was pregnant. And so our little girl was welcomed into the world after having ran around Miami Stadium, Hard Rock Stadium inside my stomach. And so I look back at that and I think, man, I had no idea at that time that little Cameron was going to come along, and it ended so perfectly. And this new chapter has begun so perfectly. And so everything happens for a reason, and it all falls into place, I believe, for a bigger purpose. And so it's really, really difficult to be in sports, and especially to travel like that when you have kids, and especially when you're pregnant. And so to have that kind of one door close, another chapter open, all in perfect timing was just so beautiful. And you don't know it in the moment, but hindsight is so 2020. And to be able to pray through all of that with my husband and to move on to, being a family and to different. And then we ended up getting hit with COVID. So it was all of these different things was crazy how it all fell into place. And I look back at it, it's like this jumbled mental mess. But the transition and the changes, I always look back and I'm like, you know what, even in the pain, there is so much promise. And that is what I have to rely on all the time.
Well, we've talked about doors mostly opening, hardly any closing during the course of this conversation. And now another door is opening for you. You have started a family, and you've decided to make this new and exciting move to really one of the most exciting women's sports franchises, I think, probably in the world right now with the direction it's going in. But still, your life had been in television. You had a long, not that long. That's not what you say to a lady, but not that long a career. But it had been your life's work, and now you have decided to take it in a different direction. Explain all that to me.
There was a lot that certainly went into making this decision, but primarily having conversations with belonged about where this organization was headed and what they've already done here in the last 2 years, and now are going to continue to do this amazing game plan in place to not only just change Kansas City and to change the sports landscape here, but also change the world, is so incredible. And you have to take a step back and think, man, this is such big picture thinking that I want to be a part of that. I want to be able to contribute to that, and I want to change women's sports. Having been a women's professional football player, I would tell people in the media world, someday, I want to make sure that women's football gets out there, that it becomes more prosperous, that women's sports become something that you can look at and be really proud of. And how I do that, I can only do so much through media, right? You can tell people stories, you can get it out there. But when you're actually embedded and ingrained in it, there's so much more that you have the opportunity to do, and you're basically getting the opportunity to have your hands in on making that so much bigger. And with the World Cup coming to the United States, and with the current creating this first training facility just for a women's soccer team, which hasn't been done in the world, and the first purpose-specific stadium for a women's professional team. These things don't just happen. They require lots of planning and lots of investment and lots of big picture thinking to make them happen. And I so badly wanted to be a part of that. And so when the opportunity was presented to me and I had a chance to talk to the owners about it, even though I loved what I did, and I still love, the media world and anchoring, and it's still something that I'm very passionate about, this was a new chapter that I couldn't pass up and I couldn't say no to, because I, again, am a firm believer that you are made for certain times in history. And I believe that I was made for this time in history and these changes that are being made here in Kansas City and within women's sports. And to be a part of that is something that I really, really look forward to, and was a big reason behind making this decision to go from media to the team side of things.
We've covered a lot of ground here, and you've covered a lot of ground in not so long time on this planet, and you give a lot of credit to your faith, as we've heard often during this particular journey, but you also must have a tremendous amount of satisfaction in yourself and how hard you have worked and the time that you have spent and the dedication that you have shown. That must be incredibly satisfying.
I, again, am a firm believer that you are a product of your preparation, and you can't get anywhere. You can, the good Lord can set you up and God can put you in and open doors, but you have to be the one that walks through them. And so I firmly believe that having the passion to do something has been placed on my heart, to love sports, to want to change the perception of women's sports, to do something so different, and being willing to make a leap of faith when you didn't really know what was coming next. The leap of faith to play football when, women in Texas didn't play football. You were either a cheerleader or a kicker. And so to go do that was something that you took a chance on. To go out to Dodge City, where I didn't know where my next step would be, that's taking a chance. In, making the most of your chances, going up to Kansas City when maybe that wasn't what we thought or we had planned, and then making this transition from being a sports director in a top 30 market to now taking over as an executive director of communications for a women's professional soccer team. While people may look at all of those moves and think, man, how did you just have the faith to do it? And the fact that you made those jumps, but then you made the most of it and you took advantage of it, I think is the most important part of my story, in that you have to have the faith to make those decisions and make those moves, while also just trusting that you will be able to make the most of those situations, and you can trust God and you can trust your faith to be able to open those doors for you while you take advantage of it. And so I take a lot of solace and pride in the fact that I've gotten to where I've gotten. But I also know that there are so many things that go into it that just sitting down here with you, Dani, for an hour doesn't even touch the surface of it. And I hope that my story can be an inspiration to other young women and other young men who don't really know, what they're going to do next, and just know that there are bigger plans for you.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Dani Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Dani Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.